to an episode of a series we have titled Wellness During COVID. I'm your host, Lonnie Ridgeway, and I represent VOA Alaska as a Coalition Director. The goal of this series, Wellness During COVID, is to prevent the adverse mental health impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, including substance misuse and social isolation, by facilitating community connection and applying healthy habits and strategies, and to have just conversations. Throughout these messages, you've heard and will hear from trusted champions in our community in the behavior field so we can glean from their knowledge and expertise. Today, I'm in the studio with our guest, Miss Stefanie Goggins. Miss Stefanie Goggins, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Yeah. Who are you and what do you do? All those details.
Okay, so I am the lead of integrated services here at VOA Alaska. I am a mental health clinician, essentially. I work with youth who are struggling with SUD, substance abuse disorders, as well as mental health disorders. So that it's a wide variety, right? So I have clients that struggle with depression, and I have clients as severe as maybe they're on the spectrum.
Yeah.
So it's a wide range.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today, specifically from my own understanding, because just with like COVID-19, just kind of jumping right into it, depression and substance misuse. I don't know if there's necessarily a lot of stats out regarding that, but I'm a little bit excited to see the stats. One, because I just like stats.
Yeah.
But also I know that they're not going to be that good. And seeing the correlation between everything we're dealing with in COVID and those specific stats and those categories, is probably not going to look the best.
Sure.
And so out of curiosity, what have you seen? Like, are some of your clientele, are they struggling? How are they doing with the substance misuse?
So we actually have seen an increase. So what we've seen is before, when we were in the schools and when the kids were in the schools, we would see them transition to us. They would come to us at a lower level of care because we were doing those early intervention strategies. Now that they're really not in the school and we don't have first line eyes on them, teachers, counselors, I've noticed that when they come to us, their higher level of care, their need is a lot higher. So we're seeing a lot more go into intensive levels like IOP all the way up to ARCH. Our ARCH facility has a number of kids, and I think that they're missing that early intervention piece.
Yeah. When you said when they come to you, how is it? Because I know in this field, I think a lot of people struggle with not whether or not, but to like bring services to the youth versus having youth come to. What is that? Do you guys actually have youth that go to you?
Yeah, so we both. So we have services basically when you want to get services with VOA through the schools or through the main office. How it works is they call and they let us know, and we set them up for a same-day assessment, and we assess them for their level of need. Maybe they don't have substance abuse. Maybe it's just mental health. Maybe it's I'm really depressed and I'm having a really hard day. Or maybe it's a mom saying, my kid is isolating in his room. He's not coming out. He doesn't have a lot of social peers. He's really secluded. Those are huge things that have been going on with COVID. Our youth don't have their friends all the time. They are missing those social pieces. And so when the parents notice these kinds of behaviors, they tend to call us. And that's when we can really reach out and help.
Yeah. So that's a great kind of example, because right now there's a lot of parents who, like my only child, and it's like sometimes I feel bad because she doesn't have anybody to play. She's the only child.
Sure.
And what I don't want is her just to be looking at electronics and all this stuff. But at the same time, throughout this time, I've seen her demeanor kind of change because she's, for lack of a better term, she's feeling a little sad, a little down. One time I even saw her like outside, like looking at the kids across the street playing. And I was like, oh man,
Aww.
that is bad. But what do you say to those parents that know that their child is there and are looking for ways to liven them up or get them out of that? They can see that their child might be going towards that depression state. What do you do? How do you tell parents to address that or navigate those?
So really, just being involved with them. I've noticed even with my own kids, the transition of not having your friends at school, and not having those social interactions really affect them. And so just knowing that, hey, let's play a board game. Hey, let's have a minute where maybe we go have coffee together in the office, or maybe we have, or in our house, or, hot cocoa time. Just having those interactions with them and being able to open the door for those kinds of conversations you'd really would be able to weed out whether this is depression or this is just my kid struggling with what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
Can they be the same thing? Maybe that has led to the depression. Sure. But I think if we're talking about severe and persistent mental illness and depression being an actual diagnosis, I think if you can weed out the difference of the missing the social pieces versus I'm really depressed and I'm just not doing well, that's a huge piece. So, and that starts with conversations at home with the parents.
Yeah. So if a parent is there, what are some signs that you would tell a parent to look for to kind of differentiate whether or not it's depression or whether it's just we're just in these times and they're just kind of sad because they're not able to see their friends?
I think there's many symptoms, right? Isolation is a big piece for all of it, but irritability, right? Those are big things, two major ones that I've seen a lot. I've heard kids tell me that I'm lonely. That tells me that they really just need social interaction. I'm just really lonely. I really feel like I just need somebody versus like I'm lonely because I have no friends because nobody likes me. There's a difference. And so I think listening to what the youth is telling you, just listen and hear them out would go a really long way. And if you have concerns, reach out and just connect them with somebody. We have peer support that could help them link in the communities. We have mental health clinicians that can help you figure out, is this really depression or is this really just my kid struggling with not being able to go to school and doesn't have their friends right now? Those are huge pieces.
Yeah.
Setting up times, maybe FaceTime dates. That's a big one that I've have my clients that are like, I just don't have my friends. FaceTime them.
Yeah.
Right? Like set up a FaceTime date.
Yeah.
So sometimes reminding them that there's cues that they can do help.
Yeah. One of the FaceTime, that's something that we've been doing and just been allowing her just to have, because they'll like play their little dance games.
Yeah.
Is that actually, is it healthy? Because I don't know any statistics or any of the like the thought behind whether or not real interaction and that electronic FaceTime type interaction, if it serves the same purpose or kind of does the same thing when it comes to connecting.
I feel like it's a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Right? Like I feel you cannot take away the importance of physical, social, face-to-face contact. That's evident in our schools with our kids struggling over Zoom platforms. That's evident in our IOP, OP treatments where, our group numbers are declining because they're having trouble making connections with them because it's over Zoom. So I think if we're looking at it that way, if it's more damaging, I couldn't say that it's more damaging. I think that FaceTime and Zoom puts a Band-Aid on what they really need, and that's the main social face-to-face interactions. So I think that that's a temporary fix. And if you have the capability to let them have a play date, sure, have a friend come over.
Yeah.
Of course, that would be more ideal than the FaceTime. But the FaceTime piece gives you those little bitty interactions when you need it.
Right.
It's there.
Yeah.
So it's like a backup.
Yeah. Talking about, kind of switching gears, talking about assessments, if you're talking to a parent that is thinking, do I need to get my child an assessment? How would they answer that? Or who would you tell to get an assessment for? Like what parent needs to get their child an assessment?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, I think if you're thinking about it, you should do it. I think if the thought is even crossing your mind, it's worth it just to have the assessment to make sure that they don't need support.
So let's say there's a parent that a thought has crossed their mind, whether or not they want to get an assessment, but one of the things that they're worried about is how like having an assessment on record might hurt their child for future jobs. Like who has access to that? Like they're a little nervous about that. Is that an issue that they need to be worried about?
No, not really. I mean, there's this stigma about diagnoses kind of following us around, right? We're also hesitant about it. But I really think that you'd find that's kind of past future treatment doesn't quite look that way.
Mhm.
There's so many HIPAA regulations and confidentiality, pieces that it's really been it's tight. And so I don't think that's an issue. No.
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of old school medicine.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So can you kind of give an insight of what an assessment looks like? Is it just like asking questions, writing it down? Are they doing something? Are they filling something out? What is it?
Yeah. So the actual assessment themselves, it's basically the clinician sitting down and asking them questions and getting to know them. And really, some of the questions are really personal. I mean, we dive into some trauma if there's there, substance abuse history, legal history. I mean, foster care. There's so many different aspects to our assessment that really paint the picture of what the client needs. Sometimes what they think they need is not really what it is.
Right.
I can't tell you how many parents are like, that's not what I thought. Like, I thought something completely different. And that's what's really great about our assessment is the different pieces that we look for. That all kind of play into this overall level of care. And when we have a client that maybe has pieces that are reach from every multiple parts, we really look at like wraparound services. And so that could mean OP or mental health. That could mean substance abuse. That could mean transitional age youth that are 16 to 24. There's so many different pieces that we can offer them that it's really hard to say like this assessment does just this because it's so broad.
Right. Always curious. So I used to work at McLaughlin for the longest time. And I loved it there. But there's always like kids never wanted to quote unquote dry snitch or like be completely. So how open and how honest are some of the people that you're interviewing during the assessments? Like, are they being honest and open or? I
think it depends. And you can really tell, usually right away. Sometimes I think the way that our questions are set up, you can hear like, I would have a client say, maybe I only smoke, marijuana 3 days a week. And then like later on, I'll see a question that potentially touches on that, right?
It's like, oh, every day.
And then they turn, right. And I'm like, well, so that means this, but what about this? And then they kind of come out with it almost. And you're like, okay.
Do you call them out on that or do you just?
So I don't. Yeah. I just note it. And then now if they come to me, which sometimes they do, I will. But I usually leave that to the directing clinician that they're assigned to. And I let them know. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how like little tidbits you'll notice, like, oh, they weren't very fruitful over here. And then you're like, oh, they were really fruitful.
Really
I got you. And then like, I remember one of our questions is like, where do you get your drugs from? And like, they're like, people like that's the one that like nobody's really
tight lip. I'm not giving you up any information. I'm not giving you any information.
And I've actually had a client say, I ain't no snitch.
I ain't no snitch.
We're like, okay.
All right. How much of that information do you actually relay back to the parents, or is it kind of only certain information goes back to them?
So that's really great because we've had this conversation multiple times with parents because it's really limited. The client gets to choose. Like, I want my mom to have full disclosure. I don't want my mom to have full disclosure. And some parents are like, what? Like, I can't have access to their medical record? No. Like, I can only give you access to it if they allow you. Yeah. So it's very tight-lipped.
I would assume that the parents know that going in, like they're explaining that. Or
they do. And they are. Because what happens is they, when you call and you're like, hey, I want an assessment, they do an assessment packet with them and the client signs. And the client can do it right in front of their parents and say, no, like, I only want a limited. And that's their right. If a client comes to me later and says, hey, I signed a full disclosure for my parents, but I want them to only have a limited, that's their right to change it. Yeah. My job is to just call the parent and say, hey, like, he revoked your full, he wants it limited only. Yeah. This means I can only disclose things about this.
Did you get angry parents?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
I would imagine. Another question that I have is, I know from kind of I deal with a lot of youth and they're pretty open, and I see like how much or how like drugs is a big thing, whether it's like vaping or smoking weed or, Xanax, all that stuff. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents don't realize how big of an issue that it is.
Mm-hmm.
Just with your experience, is that something that every parent should be aware of, or every parent should at least have knowledge? Because I've run into parents where they're like, there's no way that my kid's involved in that. And then, their kids are like, like
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes both ways. I have parents that are like, I suspect, I suspect there's got to be. And the kid's like, no. Or I experimented one time. I don't want to do it again. But my parents sent me to OP, And so I think it's a balancing act. And do I think that every parent should be aware of what their child is doing? I mean, sure, that would be ideal in every situation. But let's be honest, right? We're living in a pandemic where our parents are stretched thin. Our kids are stretched thin. And now we want to say, you really need to watch your kid because they could be using.
Yeah.
So that kind of goes back to, if you suspect it, have a conversation. And if he's, if the child's like, no, then it's your right to get them assessed for it.
Right. Sometimes you scratch your head when you're just like, I can't believe parents are not even talking about this. Like, I have a lot of conversations with my daughter. Like, there's nothing off the table in our house. And I find that it builds trust, but at least she's talking.
And I think that is really important. And I think that it really helps to have these foundational, talks with them just to set them up for life, right? There's so many life lessons that our kids are learning right now. And sometimes even as parents, we don't even realize, dude, this is a life lesson. This is something that you need to know for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to have those conversations. Do I think that it's easy? No. And I think that sometimes when we have children that have co-occurring disorders with mental health and substance abuse, I find that it's harder to have those conversations. There's a lot of, they're closed off. And so sometimes you need those family groups to really help build the family dynamics. That's okay. Just because you can't have a conversation with your child, or maybe your child doesn't feel comfortable having a conversation with you, that doesn't mean that your family's, toxic and all these, just really negative words that you hear centered around that. I really think that if you see that happening in your family, I really encourage them to reach out to any kind of family support, because just having those conversations with your kid and with, other adults, just opening that door is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Especially, and that's proven in the pandemic. I have several families that come to me and the kid's like, I hate my mom. She doesn't understand me. I hate my dad. He doesn't understand me. They don't understand what I'm going through, right? That's the number one thing that I hear. And, we got them in for family sessions, and it's totally a miscommunication. Oh, I took that different than how, you should have said it. I have clients that are like, when my parents say these comments, it really hurts my feelings. Well, do you tell them that they're hurting your feelings? Well, no. Well, why? Well, why?
Yeah.
I would like to think that if I was hurting my child's feelings, that they would say, Mom,
right.
You're really hurting me right now.
Yeah.
That's an eye opener. Nobody would ever really want to hurt their child purposely, right?
Yeah.
You're going to make steps to change.
Yeah.
And open those communications.
Absolutely. What about, so we talked about kind of the isolation and depression going up. What about substance misuse?
Yeah, so that's a big deal as well. We talked about the art, our residential facilities really, it's almost at capacity, where we're having this increase. And I think it goes back to that early interventions. And I think because we don't have the teachers don't have their hands, with the kids, they're not seeing the symptoms right away. And school counselors as well. Even our school counselors that we have in the schools, like at Bartlett and, Benny Benson, some of the other ones out there, they're not seeing these kiddos, firsthand. So I think that, we're missing out those early intervention pieces. So when they do come to us, they're at a higher level of care than what we would normally see.
Yeah.
And I attribute that to the pandemic, right? Because everybody's on Zoom.
Yeah.
And think about, like I said, parents are really stretched thin. For me, I work full time. I have 2 kids, right? I think about all the other parents out there, single parents, right? who don't have that additional adult support, or, maybe they have children with special needs that they can't really help them as much as they could if they had that support from the school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like those early intervention pieces are what's leading to these high escalating issues that we're seeing right now with the pandemic.
Yeah. How important is influence versus environment when it comes to kids, just from your experience and from your perspective, from kids making those high risk decisions? Is it, I've heard it said like this: show me your 4 closest friends and I'll show you where you are in 4 years, like things like that. Like, is the influence and who your children hang out with, is that a huge thing that parents should be more aware of?
That's a huge thing, right? And I feel like that's the debate that goes on in the mental health field over and over and over, right? That's that nature versus nurture. That's that, the family environment versus, biology, right? There's so many different pieces. Do I think that a child's environment influences who they are? Yes, wholeheartedly. We can't take that environmental piece out. That doesn't mean that it's going to define them. There's ways, life choices. We've talked about life choices. There's ways to make your environment safe. There's many times where, the child will come to us and we're looking at the family dynamics and we're like, gosh, we need parenting classes, right? We need to get them away from peers. They need new friends as part of recovery. Part of recovery is learning appropriate peers to hang out with that maybe aren't using. And it's really hard to have to give up your friends, right? So those are all moving pieces that are also environmental, but they also influence them. So I'm not sure that I'm really answering your question wholeheartedly, but I think that it's a combination of influence and environment. What about the children whose parents use in front of them, right?
That's a thing too. That's a huge thing.
That's a huge thing, right? What about that?
Yeah.
Right? What about the ones that have these, very traditional, maybe conservative parents, and then they kind of fall in that non-traditional, non-conservative? What about them, right? Parents may not understand where their child is. How do you make that connection?
And some of the kids that you're dealing with that are doing well, what are some of the common core commonalities between them and the other kids that are doing well? Just so parents can hear, like, oh man, maybe it's activities or sports or like, is there anything like that you?
It's like all the above, right? So sports, activities, staying busy, those are all huge things for them, especially right now in the pandemic. I think it's hard to say like this family. I think every family is different, and I think every client is different. So I'm not sure that there's like a one across the board. I would say some of the key factors for someone to be treatment successful, in my opinion, would be a good family environment, right? Strong support system, especially for somebody who's in recovery. I would like to see a strong peer support, right?
Yeah.
Like strong group of friends, connection. I would like to see strong internal motivations, finding out what their motivations are. A lot of clients sometimes feel like I'm selfish because I want to put myself first. No. Right? Like that's not selfish.
Yeah.
Like that's great.
Yep.
So I think it's finding the strengths that they have, because everybody has strengths.
Right.
Does everybody have weaknesses and areas of growth? Absolutely. But I think it's about finding the strengths and using those to help learn how to just become a better person holistically.
Yeah.
Learning how to grow and to become a better person, whatever that means. Maybe it's I'm really prideful and I don't want to ask for help. Learning how to ask for help. Pulling in on your strengths for that, right? Learning how to, just never stop learning, never stop growing. I think those are important. I think even as adults, right? Like we should always be growing and it's just part of human nature.
For sure.
And so I think when you stop growing and stop finding weaknesses and areas of growth, that's when the question comes in, right?
Yeah.
That's the real self-evaluation. So something that I always tell my clients, I have couples that come in, they're like, I'm a failure. I made a mistake. I relapsed, For me, I'm always like, what'd you learn?
Yeah.
Like, what did you learn from it? Like, what's your takeaway? That to me is more important than the fact that you went out and relapsed or that, you made a bad decision. Wait, what'd you learn? You know
Yeah.
what you're not going to do next time? Maybe.
I'm so glad that you said that because I feel like a lot of parents focus on talking or addressing the relapse or addressing the mistake that might have been made versus like what did you learn from it, having a conversation, because it's kids are going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
They're going to experiment.
Why did you make that mistake?
Right.
What did you get out of it? What were you going to try to get out of it? Maybe you wanted the high.
Yeah.
Why? What were you running from? Sometimes, a lot of the kiddos are like, it's an escape for me. It makes me feel numb. I don't have to feel anything. Great. But what are you trying not to feel?
Yeah. That's a great way to put it in that beginning conversation. How would you tell a parent or encourage a parent to encourage their kids? Like, what is a good carrot for a parent to dangle in front of their child to motivate them either to do better or to get chores done around the house or anything like that?
I feel like that's the number one question every parent asks.
Good. I'm glad I asked that then.
How do I get them to do more chores?
Yeah.
So really, it's about finding what motivates them in general. Like some kids are very money motivated. Some kids are not. Some kids are like, I really want to go climb or go outside and play. So I think it's about finding what is their motivating factor. Once you found it, then it's like, I don't like to look at it as a like consequence. I like to say that there's natural consequences, right? So I try to look at like the win-win situation. So for me, like if a client's like, I don't want to do this today, or like my mom wants me to do 12 things today and I don't want to do them. This is like a normal thing. Homework assignments, right?
Course.
Let's just start there, So it's like maybe we do like 4.
Yeah.
And then go take a break, go do something fun, whatever it is, and then bring them back and say, okay, maybe do 4 more. Some kids don't like that. Some kids would rather power through. Okay, so I'll tell you what, power through your 8 and then you can have this reward, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes even further than that. Sometimes it's, you've been clean for 30 days. Let's go to dinner. Like, let's go do something fun.
Yeah. I like that. I need to remember that. And I'm so like, even though I'm technically on paper, I'm a millennial, but I'm super old school.
Yeah,
where I'm like, no, you need to sit in your chair. You need to get your stuff done right now.
Yeah.
Do not get up until it's in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily always the right way to do it.
So my daughter is very headstrong.
Yeah.
She does not, and she has her own mental health. So my daughter is ADHD and she's so funny because she's like, I don't like it when I don't have control.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh gosh, girl, this is a life lesson right here.
Yep.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah, I like that. Yep.
What is it like to relinquish control? So a lot of times, like I find the same, like I used to come at her with this, like, sit down, get it done. Like you can't leave the table until you eat all your food. Right. And it's like, listen, like meet me halfway.
Yeah.
Take a couple bites, walk away, but know that like the natural consequence is you're not going to get anything else later if you're hungry. You're going to come back and you're going to finish your dinner. That's your choice. So you can get up and walk away now, sure.
Yeah. But
when you're hungry in a couple hours, like your food is going to be waiting for you.
I wonder how common that is in between just the food thing. Because, oh man, that having it in our house too.
I know.
You need to eat your dinner.
It's real. It's a real thing.
And I was raised the way like, no, you sit down. You don't get up till your dinner is gone, and you're gonna like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not, you're gonna smile, and you're gonna eat it, and you're gonna like it. And a couple of times, I even woke up for breakfast.
Yeah.
And it was, guess what? That bowl of spaghetti that I did not eat.
Yep. Sitting in the microwave waiting for you. I hear you. Yeah, I was raised like that too, right? Like I couldn't leave the table if I didn't eat my whole plate.
Yeah.
But I've learned that I get a lot farther. Like with my kiddo, I get a lot further if I like offer alternatives. Like these are your choices, like choice A or choice B.
Right.
At the end, it's still kind of the same, right?
Yeah.
Like whether you sit here and eat it all now or whether you take a few bites and go play and then you decide you're hungry later and you're going to come back and you're going to eat it. So at the end of the day, both choices come down to the same thing, which is what? She's going to eat her dinner one way or the other. Consistency is key. I mean, that's that same type of scenario, option A, option B, that can be applied to school. Well, I don't want to do math right now. Okay, well, let's look at something else. Maybe we do English.
Yeah.
Let's do a couple of English and then we'll revisit this. Well, I don't want to revisit it. Well, I mean, then the consequences, you probably aren't going to go play. But if you got 2 of the math assignments done, I'd let you go have for 30 minutes on whatever, outside or video games or whatever it is that they want.
Yeah. Adulting.
What is that like?
I know, right? And wrapping this up, can you give, once again, for the parents who don't know too much about what you do at VOA, can you give them just, again, your title, your name, and for some who's on the fence about getting assessment, walk them through how to access the information to apply to get an assessment or with that?
Yeah. So my name is Stefanie Goggins. I'm the lead of integrated services at VOA. What that means is I oversee the substance abuse department and the mental health department. And with that co-occurring as well, because we have clients that kind of fit in both. So if you are interested in getting an assessment done, basically that looks like you just picking up the phone and calling VOA and saying, hey, like I have a client that or a kid that I really needs an assessment, or I really think is struggling right now and could benefit from an assessment. And then you could get an assessment same day. You would get an email. Here's the packet that I need you to complete. Sometimes you don't even have to complete the whole packet. Sometimes it's like, here, just assign these 2. Let's get you services right away. You sound like you really need it. Get the same day assessment. And then within 7 days, you can be linked up to OP mental health or IOP, ARCH. It's really fast.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was that fast. I'm like, listen to it. And I work for VOA. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, that's
so the same day assessments actually just rolled out in November.
Okay.
So we were not doing them same day, but now we have a clinician that's designated for each day, and they do same day assessments from 9 to 3. And some days they go later because like Arch will take over Mondays and they do them into the evenings. But for the most part, it's 9 to 3. And then it takes us the assessments are kind of lengthy. It takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Then the clinician does their write-up and they contact their supervisor, me, or depending on who the clinician is. They say, hey, Steph, like I need to talk about this client. He really needs services. Okay. Have a conversation where we think it's best for him. And then I contact that supervisor for that department. If it's Arch, I say, hey, Chelsea, I got a client coming to you.
Yeah.
We talk about it and figure out where they're going to go. And then, we assign them their clinician. And then usually within 7 to 10 days, they have contact and they figure out what's best.
Nice.
And you have an intake and you're good.
Sweet. That's pretty simple.
It is.
Get a call. Same day intake. I need to get that language in my vocabulary just so I can.
Same day assessment.
Same day assessment, not intake. You promised me what? Yeah. Same day assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Stefanie, appreciate it. Thank you. This has been rewarding and knowledgeable, even for me. Even a staff member at VOA, I'm like, oh, okay. Learn some stuff. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Anytime.